Many of you have been here at church when we've had a baptism at Mass, and you know that part of the ritual is to give the godparents a lit candle. And what I say to the infant being baptized is, this right here, this light, it's the light of Christ. It's going to light up the path for you. And I find myself wondering, what is the child thinking as they hear me talking? What do the parents think about that? What could be on the path? The thing about the image of the light is it only lights up the next step. It doesn't light up the whole path. This isn't a floodlight, it's candlelight. The light of Christ comes just a little bit ahead of us. It doesn't shine all the way. But as Martin Luther King Jr. said, you don't need to see the whole staircase in order to take the next step. Peter and Paul, who we're celebrating tonight, were two of the great giants, maybe the giants of the church. And they're the whole reason that the church is based in Rome instead of Jerusalem, because that's where they gave their life for this faith. But the two of them were not the same. As a matter of fact, there's a number of scriptures where you'll catch them arguing. And their personalities were completely different. They were night and day, oil and water. So to understand how to follow Jesus the way they did, we have to hear two stories of how to do it, since they didn't do it the same way. I think the first reading gives us the best glimpse of Peter's gift. If you were following that whole reading, you heard that he was broken out of jail by an angel. But the angel said things to him that I have to admit, if I were chained to the floor of a jail, would have really annoyed me. The angel comes into the jail cell, sees him shackled to the floor, and says, "Get up." Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Get up. But Peter doesn't say get up, or he doesn't complain about that request. He says, okay. And he gets up, and the chains break for no reason, for no clear reason that Peter could have predicted. Then the angel says, put on your belt, and he just does it. Put on your sandals. He doesn't say, where are we going? He puts on his sandals. Put on your cloak. Now follow me. And because Peter was willing to walk one step at a time through the angel's directions, they walked right past the sleeping guards. He didn't question, what do you mean get up? He didn't question, where are we going? Who are you? He was willing to follow the kind of advice that a luminous being gave, even if it made no sense. I once was in the home of a 104-year-old woman in my last parish named Anne Feth. And I asked her what was the secret to life. I think if you get to be with a 104-year-old, that's a pretty good question to ask. What's the secret? And she said, the secret is to just live 1 minute at a time. And I said, Anne, that's beautiful. But how do you do it? I get what you're saying, but how do you do it? Live life 1 minute at a time. And she looked at me and she said, well, you can't exactly live 2 minutes at a time, can you? So just live one. So I gotta say, Peter had tons of struggles, and they're well documented, and you've heard them over and over again. Good Friday being one of his low moments, but he was really good at this. He was really good at one step at a time. And you know that's true. Remember, he was sitting there mending his fishing nets. It must have smelled horrible in the sun after a night of fishing. And Jesus comes up and says, follow me. And he just puts down his net, puts down his business, and follows him. Peter is our role model in living life 1 minute at a time, just like Anne told us to. But like I said, he and Paul might be considered the two giants, but they did things very differently. Peter was really good at one step at a time. And Paul sometimes jumped ahead. But his gift was seeing where he wanted to be in the end and doing whatever it took to get there. Paul knew what he was aiming at better than Peter did. Peter was better at living 1 minute at a time. I think one of the lessons that St. Paul gives us is that we should spend more time in our life focusing on our obituary rather than our resume. A lot of us spend most of our life just trying to have a nice resume, to live on the right street, to have the greenest lawn or the nicest car or whatever. And I think we can recognize that when we go to someone's funeral, it's not their resume that we're thinking about. We actually don't care about it. No one brags about someone's wealth or success at their funeral. They talk about their virtues. I just had the opportunity to celebrate the funeral of one of my dear mentors. You heard me talk last week about the death of Father David Noon, who was the priest in Hudson Falls back in the 60s and the 70s. A lot of people just loved him. His funeral was down at his parish where he spent 27 years, down in Colony, Christ Our Light. But you should have seen all the people that came from Hudson Falls. Many of them hadn't seen him in 50 years. That's how big an impact he had on them. Something I knew for the years that I knew him is he wrote his obit years ago, and he would often work on it. He had this copy of his obit, but then he'd always be like editing it and trying to improve it. And it's so good, I'm going to put it in the bulletin next week. I think you really deserve to read this. And here's an excerpt from what he said. Actually, here's the very first sentence of the obit that he wrote himself. Imagine opening up the newspaper and reading this. Well, if you're reading this, that means no more emails, no more worrying about what to say in a homily, no more doctor's appointments or remembering which pills to take. And then he said, at the end, further down, I hope I've left behind more love than regret, more laughter than tears, and more faith than doubt. You may know that monks have a Latin phrase that is common to hear in the monastery. And the phrase is memento mori, which is Latin for remember death. It's the kind of thing you're always supposed to keep in the back of your mind or in your peripheral vision. That's why sometimes, maybe some of you have seen some old religious items that have a strange feature and you've wondered, why is that there? Well, you're about to find out. Have you ever noticed that sometimes if you've ever cleaned out relics from your great-grandmother's house, and maybe they say, oh, this crucifix belonged to great-grandma, and you look at it, there's a skull at the bottom? I've had people actually tell me, Father, I think this is evil. I think somebody took a crucifix and added a skull to it. Do you think they're like devil worshipers or something? And I say, no, actually, that's pretty common. It's the little reminder of memento mori, remember death. We're supposed to remember that we're going to die someday. And so that's why those things that were at the end of my friend's obituary are so interesting. I'm going to die someday, we say to ourselves. Am I going to leave behind more love than regret? Am I going to leave behind more memories of laughter than tears? Am I going to leave behind more faith than I leave doubt? That's how St. Paul lived. He was very focused on how do I want to end up? How do I want to leave this world? He wanted to have a beautiful obituary. And that's a goal for all of us. You might know that to do that, he had to kind of backtrack over some earlier decisions. He had to course correct. Because if you know St. Paul, you know that he always wanted to do things well. And early in the story, he thought that the Christians were a threat to his beloved religion. He's like, who are these people? Is this a cult? What's happening to my beautiful Jewish religion? Why are these people acting like this? And he wanted to get rid of them. He thought they were threatening the religion. And then you remember that he was knocked off his horse. A lot of you remember that story. And from that moment, he was completely different. He realized, I've been doing things wrong. And that's why you'll often hear one of the most quoted things he ever said is, if I can do amazing things, but I don't do them with love, what good is it? If I defend my religion, but I do it by hating other people, what good is that? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't have jealousy or rivalry. He had to course correct. And we heard that in the second reading today. That was St. Paul. It's probably one of my favorite readings I ever hear at the end of someone's life, when they say, I have competed well. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. You know what's really interesting? That reading is a selection we could use for someone's funeral. But it can't be used for everybody, can it? It would be awkward to choose that as the reading if it weren't really true. Well, they finished some of the race. They didn't always keep the faith, but they mostly competed well, except when they sometimes cheated or did dirt to the others. You have to live a certain way to earn the reading. I have competed well. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. One of the things I love about the church putting Peter and Paul together, even though they were so different, is that it shows there's no one best way to serve God. And there's no such thing as someone who's unable to do it. Well, I can't do it because of my ornery personality, someone might say, or because I'm so impatient. I can't serve God. Oh no. Peter and Paul show us everybody can. Even people who are overzealous, like Peter, or people who are kind of strict, like Paul could sometimes be. And that's why we don't have to be afraid. Do you remember the song that goes, if you cannot preach like Peter, if you cannot pray like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus and say he died for all. There's no wrong way to do it. Just do it the way that God gave you to do it. I'm going to leave copies of Father David's funeral program back there and some of his prayer cards. If you ever knew him, you might like to take one and have it in your prayer book. But I want to share with you what it says at the end of his obituary that I'll put in the bulletin next week. Here's what it says. If you want to honor my memory, don't send flowers. Just take some time to notice grace at work in your own life. Be kind to the people around you. And if you think of it, say a prayer that I made it home safely. He competed well. He finished the race. He kept the faith. And he and Peter and Paul show us there are many roads that lead to home. We don't need to see the whole staircase. We just need to take the next right step.